Welcome, everyone. Not only did we make you trek across the entire convention center to get here from Mark and Jeffrey's session, but we're also going to get you to kind of sit close together and get cozy. So if everyone can kind of move in to allow other people to feed into the room, I'd really appreciate it. My name is Natalia Matskavicius, and I'm here to talk to you about Azure Consistent Service Delivery. Unlike Mark and Jeffrey's session, we will have demos in this session, so we'll show you a little bit more details about the Microsoft Azure Stack. So co-presenting with me will be Bradley Bartz and Igor Sadukin. This is the first of 7 sessions that will really give you an overview of the platform that Mark Russinovich and Jeffrey talked about. How many of you, by the way, went to Mark Russinovich and Jeffrey Snover's session? Show of hands. So it looks like almost the entire room. So they talked quickly about the cloud-optimized platform, cloud-consistent service delivery, as well as cloud-inspired infrastructure. There are 1 of 7 sessions that you can attend. So this is the first one. The rest of them will be tomorrow that you can attend to really get a full overview of the Microsoft Azure Stack as well as the Operations Management Suite. So let's talk a little bit about trends in the industry. Something that I've been seeing in the industry is that business is really driving a lot of change and innovation. If you look at your business users, they really want innovation in their platforms. They want it agility. They want things quickly. For instance, if you have a marketing program or a sales program, those business units want a lot of data. They want to actually capture some of that data quickly and then really get fast services out there. So many of those business units are going to the cloud to get that agility. Gartner said, and I was really surprised about this, that 40% of IT spending is actually happening outside of corporate IT. This shadow IT type of services is happening because of that agility, that innovation that businesses require. On the other side of the spectrum is IT, and IT has always needed control of the infrastructure to minimize risk and mitigate that. So it's that command and control model where you have stability, predictability, a lot of change control, really understanding the infrastructure and any changes that are made to the infrastructure can introduce risk, whether it be security risk or it could be hardware risk. So IT needs that stability and predictability. What we think is that cloud services delivery can actually give you a unique opportunity to provide that innovation and agility in your infrastructure by using cloud-inspired infrastructure. So we're going to talk today about cloud service delivery and the Microsoft Azure Stack. So we want you to be at the center of application innovation. As I mentioned before, a lot of businesses are using shadow IT. There's been a lot of investment in virtualization over the years, and we've kind of taken that time and virtualized almost everything to reduce operation costs. So at the infrastructure level, there's been a lot of efficiency. But there's been a lot of innovation happening at the applications and services level. Azure as a public cloud has really taken advantage of that, and you have an opportunity to do that as well. So there's an opportunity to rethink your data center approach. Jeffrey and Mark talked about the traditional data center compared to a cloud data center. In a traditional data center, you have a tight coupling between infrastructure and applications. There's a lot of controls from your servers, a lot of that change control that needs to happen. You have some of the infrastructure is siloed with operations. There's customized processes and configurations that need to happen. On the flip side, in a public cloud environment, you really have elastic pools of compute, storage, networking. There's loosely coupled apps and microservices that allow for some of that innovation and agility that the businesses require. There's standardized processes and configurations that allows you that agility. And it's very service-focused. So we want to look at how can you, as an IT pro, transform some of the people and processes in your organization to meet this new service delivery paradigm. In today's environment, you have administrators and users. There's server administrators, network administrators, storage administrators, really managing the infrastructure, managing that IT control to mitigate risk. Then your end users, where you're actually providing those controls to the users. But in cloud service delivery model, there are providers and customers are very different. Their needs are different than the average user. From a customer perspective, a customer wants to have better ROI. They want to understand how their applications are working. They want to be able to have the agility to change things very quickly and adapt to actually bring more value to the business. So, in this new paradigm, there's an opportunity with cloud service delivery to change some of those roles. At the bottom layer is your infrastructure administrators and service administrators. They actually manage the core infrastructure as well as look at the services and how to manage those services. Then at the top, you still have your end users, but then also developers and operators to manage infrastructure. So we're really transforming the people and the processes so you can actually have cloud service delivery in your data center. So today, we introduced the Microsoft Azure Stack. The Azure Stack gives you cloud-optimized application platform. So you can use some of the new cloud-born type of applications as well as traditional applications, delivering them through service delivery. And the service delivery is what's really important. It's different than just virtualization. It's providing services. Services that can be tightly coupled with resource groups so you can actually deploy applications quickly, efficiently. And it's all built on a foundation of cloud-inspired hybrid infrastructure. So the power of Azure and the control of the data center is what the Microsoft Azure Stack brings to your data center. On the Microsoft Azure side, you've got the cloud infrastructure where we've built at scale. Jeffrey mentioned when we deploy storage, it's at 20 racks at a time. So we've learned from all of that, and we're bringing some of the software-defined data center technologies and insights to the actual on-premises data center. So we've taken that cloud infrastructure and it become a cloud-inspired infrastructure on your on-premises. But from a portal, an IaaS, and PaaS services perspective, it's exactly the same. It's consistent. It's consistent with Azure, not just complementary to it. It's the same. Both of these paradigms then allow you to have Windows Server and Linux applications. So you have the same application development platform where you can write once, deploy anywhere. So Microsoft Azure, the public cloud, we've actually taken a common core of Microsoft Azure and allowed that to bring you to your data center. This allows for you to have a common ecosystem. So whether you're actually creating templates to deploy applications or ISV applications, it's a common ecosystem between Microsoft Azure and your on-premises data centers. The consistent delivery gives you agility, control, and flexibility. From an agility perspective, again, you can write once, deploy anywhere. Later in today's presentation, you'll see that you can actually deploy not just to this with the same template. You can either deploy to Azure or to an Azure Stack private or hosted data center. You can support traditional or cloud-native applications, so SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, or some of the cloud-native applications that are being written to public clouds. You can have a simplified, abstracted experience. So the experience is very easy, so you can have resource groups and really deploy things easily. From a control perspective, which is really important to IT, you still have the control within the service delivery. So there's unified configuration, provisioning, and updating. We've integrated IT and business processes. So again, you can still have that command and control. And then most importantly is still the flexibility that you need. There's consistent APIs and services. So the same APIs that you write to in Azure, you can use in the Azure Stack. Resource management. Mark Rusinovich mentioned how in Azure we have the Azure Resource Manager, and you can have pools of resources and resource groups. You have consistent resource management between the public cloud as well as in your data center. And the framework is extensible, so you can plug in different components into the framework. So we've got partner solutions that can plug in and different ways to show some of the service delivery. So let's take a look at the Azure stack from an architecture perspective. At the top, we talked about that cloud-optimized application platform. So at the top, we have Windows Server and Linux. So it's supported in heterogeneous environments with consistent DevOps tools, so things like PowerShell, the templates, and then a portal experience that is it's the same as in Azure. Then what's most powerful is the whole Azure Resource Management. So Azure Resource Manager gives you subscriptions. It gives you the RBAC control that you need in an IT environment. Similar gallery, metrics, usage, so you can really understand the environment and understand what's happening in the application. And then finally, the same services. So from a services perspective, there's the platform as a service technologies, as well as IaaS with extensions, so you can support things like containers. All of this is deployed on a cloud-inspired infrastructure. That infrastructure is where we've taken some of the learnings from Azure and brought them down to the data center. So from a software-defined data center perspective, there's innovations in storage for software-defined storage, innovations in networking, where we brought things like the network controller down, compute, management, and then security. And all of this can be managed with the Operations Management Suite as well as System Center. So what does it look like? You saw a demo this morning with Jeff Woolsey in the keynote with Brad Anderson. This is the new portal experience. And you'll notice it is the same as the portal experience in Azure. The stack is actually layered if you look at the different components. At the top of the stack is the new Azure tenant experience. So it is that portal experience that, again, is the same as in Azure. Then there's management tools underneath that through the Azure Resource Manager. Then we've got consistent services. So the services are infrastructure as a service. So if you've seen some of the infrastructure as a service innovations we've done in Azure, we're bringing those down to the Azure stack. And then bringing platform as a service services. And then finally, again, at the foundation is cloud-inspired hybrid infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Bradley to do some demos, because I know you all want to see the actual technology. I'm going to hand over to Bradley.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's talk a little bit about this, these tenant experiences. And what do we mean by tenant experiences? These are the consumers. Natalia talked about providers and consumers. These are the cloud consumers. They might be developers. They might be IT professionals. They might be application owners. It's the consumer of cloud services. And what's really compelling about Azure Stack in your data center, your ability to self-host Azure in your data centers to help prepare your organizations to become cloud ready. They can build their enterprise critical applications and deploy those just like they always have, and have this robust for traditional workloads, but also for modern cloud-native applications at the same time. So what we're going to do a quick run-through is show how developers and application developers targeting cloud-native applications, building cloud applications for public cloud, can use those same capabilities, the same management tools as they do for Azure Public, they can now use for targeting a self-hosted Azure environment in your data center. So let's go ahead and switch to that. Okay, starting here, this is actually, I have Azure running. This is, I do have Azure running, but this is actually the portal of Azure Public Cloud. And in Azure Public Cloud, we can see here that I'm logged in with my corporate identity, and I can manage resources. When I start this, I'm actually going to show how developers post or how I publish an application to Azure Public Cloud. Here I am in PowerShell, and in PowerShell, I'm using the Azure SDK. Now, we only have one Azure SDK. We don't have like a public Azure SDK and a private Azure Stack SDK. There's one Azure SDK. And here I am with a connection to my Azure Public Cloud. I just want to call out a couple of things here real quick. I do have a subscription to the public cloud. When I zoom in real quickly here, you can see that my subscription that I have in Azure is actually, ooh, that's not very pretty. I'll do this again. That subscription is actually has an alias or a friendly name of Brad's public demo. You'll see why I had to kind of give it a friendly name here in a moment, but I am actually using a public cloud subscription in this PowerShell session. Now what I want to do is I want to deploy that same application that was shown in the keynote, but I'm going to deploy it here to the public cloud. So I'm going to run this script. And this, by the way, is a JSON template going against that Azure Resource Manager in the public cloud to deploy a modern cloud application that has a variety of resource types. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. We'll call it AZ Azure Stack Demo. What are we in? We're in, I'll just call it 44. I don't know why 44. Okay, it's going to start that demo and start that deployment right now into the public cloud. It's going ahead and doing that. It's provisioning the resource and getting it started. Now, if I go back to that portal, I go back into here, I can browse my resource groups that are in the public cloud. I'm going to go ahead and hit Browse Everything here, and I'm going to scroll down to my resource groups. I'm zoomed in pretty heavily here. Pick my resource groups. There they are. I need to refresh this portal. Hang on just a second here. Okay, I'm going to go back to that browse experience. I am going to close this session for a moment and launch another browser window. I'm going to go to the Azure Public Cloud. Okay. Resource groups, there they are. And now I have resource groups. Woohoo! All right. Matter of fact, you can see AZ Demo right now, 44, what I just launched from PowerShell, being deployed. And that's an active deployment that's happening right now in the public cloud. And we can see that it's a running deployment, actively being deployed, and we can actually go in and look at the audit log of what's happening in it. So as I could drill in, this is what the Azure Resource Manager allows me to do. I can see that process of what's going on as it provisions all the resources that are required for that application. In addition to that, because we're in the public cloud and we have Azure Resource Manager, I can do things like define RBAC rules. And I can go in and add constraints on who can access this application. And I can have new roles defined for my organization, and I can add new users and give them certain limited sets of capability, whether they're an owner, a contributor, or a reader. That's all built into the control plane of the cloud. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at one that I deployed earlier. It's called Bill's Coffee Shop. So I drill into this. We'll see in Azure that we have a fully deployed application. It has many resources in it, and if I take a look at all the resources, you'll see that there's quite a few. There's virtual machines with a cache, a worker for traditional. There's actually some NICs, a public IPs, a VNet deployed with it, a database. We've got some storage accounts associated with it. And we actually have a web application for a presentation tier. So as I log in, or go ahead and click into the web resource for this application, I'll get the dashboard for that web, for the front end of that application, and I'll be able to browse to the running application that is running in the public cloud. And now I'll go ahead and hit browse, and it's now launching Bill's Coffee Shop up here in the corner. I don't know if you can see that. This is where we're going, to this endpoint right there. using Azure Web Sites capabilities, and it's refreshing. There's the application. It's deployed that I deployed previously. All right, what you've just seen is an Azure experience, something that maybe your customers are doing when they interact with the public cloud. Let's talk briefly and now go look at an Azure Stack deployment. Now, because I have this resource, the AZ Demo 44, still being deployed, I'm going to switch to another PowerShell window. And this is a PowerShell window, and it's actually pointing to the public cloud, just like my previous one was. But I'm going to switch my subscription. I'm now going to switch to a subscription I have in an Azure Stack environment, because Azure Stack is just another Azure environment that I happen to have deployed locally. But as far as PowerShell is concerned, it's no different than Azure Public Cloud. So I'm switching my active subscription to be an on-premise. Now I want you to look real closely here. Something just happened kind of magically. I'm going to zoom in. Now, a couple of things I just want to highlight here. The subscription changed. I doubt anyone actually caught it, but it is a different GUID. The key thing to note is the friendly name for that subscription is different. This one's named Brad's Private Demo. It's not in the public cloud. That subscription does not exist in Azure Public Cloud, only in the private Azure Stack environment. And you'll notice there's a different URI there. It says azure-stack.2015-demos.com. That is the ARM endpoint, the Azure Resource Manager endpoint in our private cloud environment. So when I registered an Azure Stack environment with PowerShell, I gave it, hey, this is where it's running. And I registered it in an Azure environment. And PowerShell says, great, you've got another one. I'll just use it like any other Azure environment. So there we have it. And now I can interact with it. And I can go ahead and deploy an application just like I did in Azure. I'm going to go ahead and start that deployment going. I'm going to give it a resource name, AZ Demo 45. I could name it 44. It's in a different cloud. I won't get any name conflicts. I'll go ahead and do that because this is in the private cloud environment. So that application is now being provisioned against the private cloud. Let's go to a browser instance I have looking at the private cloud. So here's one here. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the browser now. A couple of things I want you to be aware of. In this case, I'm actually logged into the private cloud with my same corporate identity as I had in the public cloud. So my identity is fluid. It's moving between public and private cloud equally well. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and spin up another browser instance, just like I did for the public cloud. We'll go to the Azure Stack environment. And there I am. I'm logged in. This is actually with my same corporate identity. I now am logged into an Azure Stack. I gave it just a different theme, so you can see that it's a different instance of the Azure portal. It's the Azure Management Experience. When I go ahead and do the browse all, I'll see resources I have running in the private cloud. I'll see resource groups, again, coming from the Azure Resource Manager. There's AZ Demo, that just like I deployed in the public cloud. And I didn't lose any capabilities. It is still an advanced application being deployed. I can go look at the active deployment that's happening of this in the private cloud. I can see the status of all the resources that are being provisioned against the private cloud environment and where they're at. Full capabilities that I would see in Azure Public Cloud. Just like in Azure Public Cloud, I pre-deployed one, Bill's Coffee, in the private cloud environment. I can drill into this application, and I can go look at all the resources. Here you'll find that it has the same virtual machines, NICs, public IPs, VNet, database, storage, blob, table kind of capabilities, as well as a web application for a front end. I'll go ahead and click into that web application where it'll pull up that, and I can browse to this. So now I'm going to look at that front end of the application I deployed in the public cloud running in the private cloud. So what you're seeing is this continuity of application development and APIs. By the way, I lost no functionality. If I go back here, because it is still running on Azure Resource Manager, oops, let me get right back into Bill's Coffee. I just want to make a point of this because it's a big deal, actually. Even though I'm in private cloud, I still have full RBAC capabilities. I can add roles. I can add new users for this application as far as what they're going to have access to, whether they're an owner, contributor, or reader, and who are the users that can actually access and manage that application. So I have the same capabilities I would have in the Azure public cloud, but I now have it in the private cloud. All right, let me just keep going for a quick second here. The applications are still being deployed. In addition to that, developers use a variety of tools for interacting with the cloud. They also use tools like Visual Studio. And in Visual Studio, I can build an application targeting the cloud. Here's one, and this is one of those ARM templates that we'll get into. But when in Visual Studio, there's a capability. If I say File, New Project, in that project, I'll be able to pick an Azure resource group. I'm just going to zoom in for a quick second here. And again, see this new project type in Azure, in Visual Studio? For project types that target the cloud, there's a variety of them. Here you see Azure Web Jobs or Azure Mobile Services, and this is an Azure resource group for composing a templated application that I want to deploy into the cloud. And when I go ahead and create one of those, I'll get a variety of different template types I can create, whether it's a web app, a SQL, a traditional application just running on a virtual server, on a VM, whether I'm going to have a load balancer being part of that. I can go in and create an Ubuntu server for Linux, a blank template, a Docker application, a variety of cloud applications. And this is Visual Studio targeting the cloud, and I can build these applications whether it be public cloud or self-hosted cloud, and I don't have to use a different tool to do it. Your developers, your users, will now be able to target the cloud equally well in both environments. Let me go back to Visual Studio here. Let me reopen the project. Okay, one of the other capabilities, again, as a Visual Studio developer, when somebody has actually built an application, by the way, they have a complete ability to look at all the parameters and variables and resources that are part of that template. When they are ready to deploy it, there's a deploy capability in Visual Studio. When I click deploy and I create a new deployment in Visual Studio, I have an ability to register my identity. In this case, I am using my bradleyb@microsoft.com identity, but notice here, here's a little drop-down. It allows me to pick which cloud do you want to target. How does it know? It knows which clouds I have access to. I have access to Azure Public Cloud, but I also have access to an Azure Stack deployment for private cloud. Now, when I pick public cloud, one of the things it's going to do is go look at the private cloud, and it's going to look at all the subscriptions I have access to in the public cloud. Notice that there's Brad's public cloud subscription, and it can see the resource groups that are in the public cloud. There's that AZ demo resource group we just started deploying earlier. The Bill's Coffee Shop, I have a Brad's demo and this other storage account. So I can pick which storage container or resource groups I want to deploy this application in. Equally well, when I target the private cloud, it's going to talk to the private cloud just like it does the public cloud. Here it's getting a list of my subscriptions from the private cloud. I only have one, Brad's private demo. I pick that. Now I'll see the resource groups that are in the private cloud. Notice here, there's that AZ demo that I just started deploying at the beginning of this demo. Bill's Coffee Shop and another Brad's demo resource group. And again, here what you're seeing is that from a tooling set, I can target the cloud environment equally well, whether I'm going against public or private cloud, for one of your cloud consumers that you're enabling. And it's not just limited to Microsoft-authored tools. I'm going to show you another tool. This is an open source tool that was actually developed, and it's in GitHub. So you can go and download it, and it's a community tool for Azure, for doing Azure development, for managing Azure storage accounts, for managing blob and tables in Azure. So I can go in, and it's talking right now to a blob container I have in Azure, my Azure Stack environment. So I'm going to go back to the browser just for a quick second here. So here's my Azure Stack browser. So if I do Browse All and go back to Resource Groups, I have a resource group under Brad's demo that has a storage account. And one of the things in that storage account is a blob. Yes, Azure Stack is actually bringing Azure blobs to your data center for you to self-host for building modern applications. When I look in that blob, I have a container called Stuff. And in Stuff, I have no resources have been uploaded to that blob container. Now I'm going to use this open source tool called Azure Storage Explorer. Only been authored to talk to Azure. It's never been changed or modified in any way to talk to Azure Stack Private Cloud. But I did register my storage container from the private cloud with it. It just asks for an endpoint for your blob. So I've done that. Now I'm going to upload an image. I'm going to upload an image to my private blob account. There I've just uploaded it, and I can get information about that in this tool. But if I'm going to go back to the portal for just a moment. So here I am. Back in Brad's demo, blobs, my blob container, if I click into my stuff container, you'll notice now an image has been uploaded. It's been uploaded to that blob account. I can click into it. I can see this there. It's got an endpoint. I can copy that endpoint. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to open up another tab. I'm going to paste in that endpoint that I just uploaded. And there was a tweet on the announcement of Azure Stack from this morning at its keynote. So what you're seeing right now is this continuity, this ecosystem of tooling. This is what we mean by enabling your organizations to be cloud ready. By deploying Azure Stack in your environment, you'll be able to allow them to not only continue to do what they've done with traditional applications, but to start to build modern cloud applications using cloud tools that they're developing. Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation for just a moment here. Okay, you just saw the demo, the tenant experience. This is Cloud Consumer, where I'm looking at the portal, I'm looking at PowerShell, I'm looking at developer tools and SDK for this broad ecosystem of applications that can be deployed on the Azure cloud, whether it's self-hosted or in the public environment. And again, I can't stress enough that even though it enables cloud native applications, it can run all your traditional workloads as well, your mission-critical workloads, whether it be a dedicated VM on a single machine, whether it's a complex multi-tiered application running in your data center now, or whether it's a cloud-native application. Azure Stack supports the spectrum of applications, just like Azure Public Cloud does. Because it supports the cloud application tooling environment, you now have this application lifecycle that can continue to improve and grow with the cloud in your organizations. Your developers can use this agile development model for building not only public cloud applications, but private cloud applications. Okay, central to the Azure Stack and to Azure Public Cloud is this control plane. You just saw me using PowerShell and Visual Studio in the portal. They're all speaking a REST protocol. That REST protocol is coming from the Azure Resource Manager. The Azure Resource Manager represents that control plane where tooling and developers and administrators can get access to resources coming from the cloud environment. The Azure Resource Manager provides a templated orchestration engine. You can define templates for the cloud. These are JSON templates that are multi-resource aware. Mark Rusinovich has quite a few sessions on this. I encourage you to look at that. Matter of fact, if you start building templates for Azure Public Cloud today, the Resource Manager, those templates work equally well in Azure Stack. That's using the same Azure Resource Manager. It still has a subscription model so that you can actually define cost containment envelopes within your organization for chargeback scenarios. So you can have a rich set of how you monitor, or how you basically provide controlled access to cloud resources that you're hosting in your data center. RBAC capabilities, even within a subscription, which is really a billing instrument or chargeback instrument, you can have a rich RBAC model for how you provide access, and it's pervasive. It not only is tenant resources, but also provider resources, and we'll see what I mean. Everything that goes through Azure Resource Manager can be RBAC'd. There's a gallery of applications that can be deployed locally and publicly. And we talk about that ecosystem that Natalia was talking about. Application developers and building either traditional applications or whether you're doing something using containers or using other kinds of modern applications, those can be packaged and deployed not only public cloud. ISVs can build those, but they can also make those applications available in the private cloud. Monitoring and metering as well as an audit log. So Azure Resource Manager provides a way to describe your application. What are the resources required for your application to be deployed? Whether it's what kind of app is it? What kind of compute and networking resources? Does it need a load balancer? What kind of IP addresses does it need? Does it need a VNet? How are you going to define it? All of that is templatized for you to define the shape of your application. Does it need additional storage? Database or blob or tables or other storage models. You can completely describe that in basically a text file, a JSON file that represents that application. It can be parameterized so that it can be completed during the deployment process. So you can describe it and then you can deploy it. The same template will be deployable in the public cloud, so if you have an asset that's being developed and you're basically incubating it inside your data center on Azure Stack, if you do want to take it to the public cloud, you'll be able to take that same description of the application and deploy it into the public cloud. This consistency between public and private cloud. Okay, you've just seen kind of a walkthrough of the cloud consumer. But inside here, we're cloud providers. We actually provide the cloud to our customers. So now there are several roles that Natalia talked about, one of which was a service administrator. Somebody in your organization that is basically going to manage the services that they're offering to that cloud consumer. What's their experience look like? So we'll take a quick demo of that. Switch gears again here. Okay, I'm going to refresh this browser again. Now, in Azure Stack, the service provider is just another role. I'm actually logged into the same portal instance, but you'll notice I'm logged in with a different identity. I'm logged in as demo admin. As a demo admin, I have some additional capabilities that the cloud consumer doesn't have. One of those is the ability to create, oh, this is zoomed in pretty high. Let me zoom out just a second here. Okay, one of those capabilities, you'll notice that they have another hub, another icon on the hub that cloud consumer didn't have. It's the provider hub. And when I click into the provider hub, this is where the service administrator can go in and look at the resources that they're providing to cloud consumers. This is where I can basically register capabilities and manage services that are running in the data center that are being offered to my tenants. Okay, so for example, you'll notice I have a SQL deployment, I have a subscription manager, I have networking. Basically, when we talk about the new compute model, there's basically what's called a networking resource provider, a storage resource provider, and a compute resource provider, a triplet for compute, storage, and networking. And they're registered with Azure Stack, and you can have multiple of these. Every region, you can actually define regions within your own data center. So you can have different distinct regions in your data center, each running their own compute, storage, and networking resource providers registered with the Azure Resource Manager. And then you can basically use that to partition workloads within your environment. So you can have some customers going into one region, others going into a different, or other customers and organizations actually going to both regions as well. And this is and the way you do that is basically through these plans. By the way, it's worth noting, Azure has an all-you-can-eat model. In the public cloud, we want you to log into Azure and use as much of it as you physically can. Don't worry, we'll charge you for it. Just go ahead and use it. And we'll build out more if we need to. Now, that kind of model for the cloud doesn't quite work well in your own data center, right? You don't really want to offer your cloud consumer an all-you-can-eat model. They'll drain your capacity. So how do you manage that? Because you're also trying to enable an agile cloud-ready environment where they can get in and still provision resources like they do in the public cloud. This is what I'm describing here. You basically can define your own offers to your cloud consumers. But your offers, you're allowed to put constraints, quotas, on how much capacity they can use. And that's done through these plans. And we have several plans that have actually already been pre-created. Matter of fact, there was a demo plan that I always have a subscription to for the applications that I'm deploying in this Azure Stack environment. And I can define a new plan. When I define a new plan, I could call it, an attendee plan. That I'm going to use for attendees. I can pick a resource group. Huh? Why would I create a resource group for a plan? Remember what I said earlier. Everything that goes through ARM has RBAC. What is the core unit of control in Azure Resource Manager? It's a resource group. And that's where RBAC rules can be applied. So one of the things this allows you to do is have different service administrators within your organization with different rights. For example, I might have one service administrator that's helping my DevOps team do some agile development. I've got a dedicated region just for them. I have another plan for my production, mission-critical applications. Well, I don't want every service administrator to be able to go in and muck with the quotas or change things. You have RBAC capabilities. I can define RBAC rules, even among my service providers and service administrators within the organization. So it extends not only to my cloud consumers, but to cloud providers can be completely RBAC'd as well. And when I go in and basically define this, I can pick in this plan what services I'm going to include, whether I want it to have data, whether I want it to have networking. In this case, I'm going to create basically an IaaS offer with storage, compute, and networking. I'm going to select those and add that to this plan. Now remember, I said that one of the advantages of this was allow you to basically define, hey, for this attendee offer, what regions, what quotas and things am I going to allow them to have access to? In this case, we have two regions, one named Paris, one named Chicago. I'm going to give everybody here access to the Chicago region, and I'll be able to define quotas for that region. So we'll go ahead, what's the number of virtual machines I'm going to allow you to create? I'm feeling really generous. I'm going to give everybody here 100 VMs. And I can say the amount of cores you're going to use, the amount of memory you're going to have, but basically this is where I'm defining constraints on what you can do with your own subscription. So once I provision that plan, I could create a subscription, or I'll have everybody in here have their own subscription to Azure Stack, and you'd be constrained by what I've defined here. Now, if you need more, and there's a business justification for it, I can bump those quotas. So they're not fixed in time, but it does allow me to define those constraints and boundaries for how much capacity you can consume from this environment. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of that, and we'll switch back to the presentation here. And I'm going to go ahead and ask Igor Sadukin to come up and talk a little bit about the service provider and infrastructure provider.
Thank you, Bradley. So Bradley introduced you to the top of the stack where you have portal and APIs and resource management. And I'm going to continue the journey and kind of go deeper and illustrate some of the infrastructure upon which all of this is built, right? And we'll do some live demos, so it'll be fun. So the services offered in Azure Stack and Azure are all founded on infrastructure as a service. This is a foundational element. It offers compute, storage, networking as a foundational element for other services to run on. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on in the demos, the infrastructure as a service. We have this multi-region design point where effectively each region runs an independent instance of compute, network, and storage. So each region is operable completely independently of the other. At the same time, the ARM, the resource management, and the portal and the APIs, they span all the regions in a geo-distributed fashion. In each of these regions, you're going to have infrastructure that's composed of compute, network, storage, and then security across all of them with proper management element for this whole stack. And so that's what the services, the infrastructure as a service is actually running on. The job of the cloud consistent service delivery layer is to turn this infrastructure into cloud consumable resources, like VMs on subscriptions, right? But this is the foundation. Now, for each of the elements of compute, network, and storage, I'll tell you a little bit of cloud-inspired infrastructure, cloud service delivery, and then an element of an application model or application platform that stack is enabling. So, for example, in compute. So compute is founded on Hyper-V clusters. And Hyper-V is the same hypervisor that runs VMs in Azure and also in Azure Stack. So it provides this ability, for example, for you, for your customers, to take an image or VHD and run it in each of the clouds, right? So it's compatible hypervisor. On top of that, we have a set of Azure technologies that provide consistent service delivery. We're delivering those technologies in your data center. You can operate these technologies to offer the higher level cloud application model. So specifically, in compute, this is a compute resource provider that plugs into ARM, and then an Azure Guest Agent. So Azure Guest Agent is an important element that actually enables in-guest configuration of the VMs that are deployed on the cloud. So the actual application model in compute that's being enabled by these two is virtual machines and then virtual machine extensions. The virtual machine extensions are elements by which a customer can implant a set of guest configuration into a VM. So for example, you can use Puppet Chef or DSC to configure your virtual machine with a particular software. You can also deploy a set of containers. So for example, we have an extension that allows you to plug a Docker image and run it as a container inside of that VM. We also allow elements of platform as a service to run in your VMs. For example, Service Fabric that we announced at Build is something you can put in your VM, right? And that's what VM extension model is enabling a customer to do. We also have a platform images ecosystem where the platform provider can actually provide a set of images to your consumers to create these VMs from. Obviously, a customer can bring in your own image. So let me go and try to illustrate this stack, and we'll go through all the other ones. But right now, let's focus on compute and do a little bit of a demo. I'm going to change the resolution here because I think we've been struggling. It's actually pretty good. All right, so still a little high. Okay, great. So Windows 10 resizes with the screen. That's great. So I'm going to start illustrating compute. So first thing I'm going to do is actually deploy a VM from a template that I created. So this is done through PowerShell. So like an IT pro or DevOps, I'm just deploying my VM. And I'm going to give it a name. Say Demo X. I'm going to start deployment. And so what happens during this deployment is the PowerShell talks to REST API of ARM and transfers this template to ARM. And then ARM will look at the template and transfer the VM information in it to a compute provider. And then compute provider will try to deploy this VM on Hyper-V. So the infrastructure that you actually all know and familiar with is the one that's going to run this VM. So it's going to appear in my Hyper-V manager in a while. There's obviously a live demo, so bear with me. In the meantime, I'm just going to go refresh my portal because that's what's going to be what's happening. I'll show you the same VM in the portal and the same VM running in the Hyper-V. There's my demo resource group. I got 2 virtual machines. There's Demo X virtual machine. It's now in the process of deployment. So the compute resource provider and the compute subsystem is trying to understand what to do with this VM and what to do with ingest configuration and communicate to that VM and the Hyper-V. And so in a while, I should be able to see this VM appear in the Hyper-V. There's my virtual machine. It is still creating. All right, I'm going to show you some other VM here. And so these are all the VMs that have been deployed here during the demos. So you can see this is their uptime is so relatively same as the demos we're running. It's still under deployment. All right, I'll show you what happens if I connect to one of these VMs. So obviously the guest agent would have provisioned this VM with some name that was given to it earlier. This is one of those VMs that you've seen in a demo that was called Cache. This is one of the VMs that supported our application, and it was running there. And so that's so basically what you're seeing here is the compute resources, compute VMs that are running on a Hyper-V infrastructure provisioned from the top-level application model that is cloud consistent at the same as Azure, right? That's kind of the point of this demo. Well, we're still waiting for that VM to appear. While we're doing that, I'll continue. I'll come back to this, and we'll see this VM maybe later in the demo. Okay, so I'm going to go and continue with the story here and move on to the storage stack. So storage stack is founded on the same familiar file server foundation, storage spaces direct, and ReaFast file system that you know. And on top of this, we have a set of Azure technologies that deliver Azure consistent services, right? In this case, it's blob and table services, right? And so there's a set of Azure technologies that literally are sitting on top of these foundational elements and deliver the cloud application model for your apps to use storage accounts, right? Just the way they are in Azure. So with that, I'm going to try to demonstrate some of the storage stuff. So for storage, what I'm going to do is I am going to deploy a new storage account. I'm going to call it Demo X as well. Okay. So what happens now is, again, the template that I'm deploying up above is defining a storage account with a particular name that was an input to the template, and this template is being deployed to ARM, and then ARM talks to storage resource provider. And then storage resource provider is now deciding how to create that storage account and allocate appropriate resources and where the containers are going to live and so on, right? So in this case, on premises, it's deciding which shares are going to be used and which databases are going to be used to support tables and blobs, right? So as it happens, I'll go back to my demo resource group, and there I should eventually see multiple storage accounts. Well, I got the VM running now. We'll come back. All right, so storage account is being deployed. We'll wait for a few more seconds and see if it shows up. Remember, all of these are live demos, so this is we're experimenting with the beast right now together with you. All right, well, instead of that, I'm just going to go and try to demonstrate on a pre-deployed account, and maybe we'll see the demo X appear eventually. But what I wanted to show you here is after the account is created, I can actually use PowerShell, and I can do things like, for example, switch the PowerShell mode to managing services and upload a NanoServer VHD here to that storage account. So imagine I'm sitting here on premises, I run my NanoServer, and then what I want to do is give it to the cloud and run it there now, right? Create a VM with this image there. And so I could use PowerShell and simply point storage account management PowerShell to the different endpoint, right? So in this case, it's a private cloud endpoint and actually operate over a container in the private cloud. Great, well, I got my Demo X account created, so I'm just going to try this, right? So here's my Demo X account. Where is it? Right here, there's Demo X account. As you can see, it has no blobs in here right now, 0 blobs. So we're going to go back to the PowerShell and run this. And just type in the same account name. Okay, well, something isn't working out. So what I'm going to do is continue with the other storage account. And I'm going to show you this storage account that we pre-deployed before the demo. And there is a below, but I deployed just in the preparation. Here's the VHDs container I created there. And hopefully there's an NanoServer VHD. Now it's there in the cloud. I can now go ahead and create a VM using this ARM and portal and APIs, same as Azure. I can go ahead and create a VM here. But what's more interesting is that this particular storage account is actually represented by a directory on a file server. So when Hyper-V in Azure Stack runs this VM, it actually runs it out of an SMB share that sits on a very familiar storage space and storage share. So here I have this VHDS container. I have this NanoServer VHD here, right? So when the infrastructure runs on premises, it's Hyper-V mounting a VHD out of a share, just like you know of it today. What happens is for your customer on top of it, it looks like Azure. So you can manage it in a very familiar way as you do today, the storage spaces and so on. You can manage these disks and defragment them and so on, while your consumers, your customers, are actually consuming it as if it is Azure. Right? Makes sense? So this is the storage part. Let me go back to the presentation. And now let's talk about networking. So networking stack, in the bottom we have data plane. So data plane is virtual drivers that enable virtual networking at a very high performance, right? So Jeffrey talked about Packet Direct, where we are optimizing traffic in the background very highly. And so it comprised of a vSwitch, virtual switch that enables this virtualization of private networks, and a gateway, multi-tenant gateway that allows VPN connections to these private networks. On top of this foundation of a data plane, we have a set of Azure technologies that deliver to your data center, enable the consuming model of Azure. So what are they? They're a network resource provider, a network controller, and a software load balancer. Right? So those are the technologies that run on top of a familiar Windows Server networking data plane. Right? These two enable your customers, your consumers, for who you're creating this infrastructure, to consume virtual NICs, gateways, and software load balancing resources in a manner exactly precisely like they are consumed in Azure. Right? So when the ISV or somebody creates an app and says, I want to have a private network, he says it in the same way for both platforms. Here, however, it runs on top of a known, familiar Windows Server technologies. So let's do a little bit of a networking demo and see how the network works. I'm going to go back to my PowerShell, and I'm going to try to create a VNet here. Call it same, demo X. Again, same thing. The template that defined the private virtual network is now communicated to ARM. ARM is communicated to network resource provider, that shared technology we inherited from Azure. And then the network resource provider will communicate to network controller to now deploy and configure this private network on top of some physical network. And so that will be the next step I'm going to show you, is what is the physical network that's actually running this. So there is my virtual network called Demo X being deployed. I'm not going to wait till it finishes. So I'm just going to go back to PowerShell. Actually, let me just explore a little bit here. So here in the virtual network space, you can see a network, and you can, for example, have subnets. So these are all the private subnets. Now, in Azure, you're creating this as a private network for your application. Here on premises, it's also private network, with these addresses being your addresses or your customers' addresses, right? Except they're running on a physical network that's virtualized, okay? And then what happens now is, once this virtual network is created here using the Azure resource model, I can go ahead and create a bunch of VMs that are connected to this network, right, which is my network. At the same time, at the infrastructure level, it is running on top. Well, I need to wait till this finishes, otherwise PowerShell won't let me go to the next step. Okay, great. So it finished. So this is, basically what happened. The confirmation had to walk back up from our infrastructure to the Azure stack to confirm success of creation. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a network dump of network control estate. And what is it showing here? So this is obviously, we're in fairly early stages of this technology. And think of this as same Hyper-V console I showed you, where it showed VMs, and then what VMs are being deployed. This is very similar, except it's for networking. It's showing you the fabric of the networking. So here I have a logical network, which is a particular VLAN, right, with VXLAN technology on top of it. And that VXLAN technology is now enabling these virtual networks. And sure enough, I should be able to find my demo X virtual network here. So basically what you're seeing here is, again, the infrastructure that you know and run is running the Azure deployed virtual network, deployed in the same way that would be deployed in Azure. So that's networking. So what did we talk about? So what we talked about in summary is these technologies that we deliver to you, which have cloud-inspired infrastructure, a set of cloud-consistent Azure services, technologies from Azure delivered to your data center, right? And all of it is now operated here as an Azure stack, delivering a cloud-consistent platform for applications that your customers write for both Azure and on-premises, right? So with that, I'm going to transfer to Natalia.
So it's pretty exciting to see. As you can see, we are really bringing Microsoft Azure innovation to you through the consistent service delivery, the cloud-inspired infrastructure, and the cloud-optimized application platform. This is a way that you can have Azure in your data center, whether it be your private cloud or a service provider cloud. We're really excited about introducing the Microsoft Azure Stack. It will be available as part of the 2016 wave of products. So to learn more, how can you learn more? As we've mentioned a couple of times, the Azure Resource Manager, which you've heard people refer to it as ARM, it's not the chipset, it's the Azure Resource Manager. You can actually try some of the Azure Resource Manager in the public cloud today. So you can get familiar with that very quickly. The other thing that you can do is download the Windows Server Technical Preview and System Center Technical Preview. That will give you some insights into the cloud-inspired infrastructure and all of the innovation that we've done from a software-defined data center perspective, so from storage, networking, security. The other thing you can also do is start your journey of service delivery with the Windows Azure Pack. There are multiple sessions that are available during the Ignite conference. Part of that journey, again, I talked about, we just completed the first in that platform vision sessions, which one of 7, which is the Azure Consistent Service Delivery Overview. Tomorrow, there is an entire track of sessions to give you more information on that cloud-inspired infrastructure as well as management. And additional sessions specifically related to Azure Consistent Service Delivery. We've got several sessions that you can also attend that kind of help you with that journey to service delivery, whether that be through WAP, understanding the innovations we've made from an infrastructure as a service perspective, identity, blobs, and tables. So we've got multiple sessions that you can attend to learn more. So with that, I want to thank you, and I hope you're as excited as we are about the new Microsoft Azure Stack.